and you can bring down or pull down the message or the notes for tonight. And so the name of this, the title of this message is called Gaining Favor. I think I've got 6 pages of notes here. No way we'll get through it tonight. And next Wednesday is revival, so we'll start tonight, and then 2 weeks from tonight we'll finish this up, hopefully. But we're going to be looking at the first 8 verses of chapter 5. I'm going to go ahead and read this out of the New King James Bible tonight. Starting in Esther chapter 5, in verse 1, the Bible says, "Now it happened on the 3rd day." Now remember, Esther and her maids have been together and fasting for 3 days. Mordecai and his people have been fasting for 3 days. And so on that 3rd day, it said, now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. And so it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. And then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, up to half the kingdom." So Esther answered, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." Well, then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said." So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And at the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to the half of the kingdom it shall be done." Then Esther answered and said, "My petition and request is this: if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." Now, as we look at this picture here, and we've been looking at the first 4 chapters at the decree that had been made against the Jewish people, and how that Esther had been encouraged by her older cousin Mordecai that she had been born and placed in the position to be able to save the children of Israel from the diabolical plans that Haman had put forth for the Jewish people. That we can't forget that when Esther walks into this inner court, that the life of the queen is in jeopardy. Now, most of us today, as we're in this world that we live in today, most of us, when we hear the word jeopardy, we think about Alex Trebek. We think about him asking or giving answers, and then you've got to respond back, forming a question, and you've got to hit the button, got to be first in. And the worst thing's going to happen to you, you walk in there, you ain't got no money. The worst thing's going to walk out of it, you ain't going to have no money. That's the worst thing's going to happen. But when it comes to Esther, for her, this isn't a game. This lady is in fear of her life, and rightfully so. She had no idea what her uninvited presence was going to do to the attitude of a king whose personality was very moody. He has already proven that he can be manipulated because of his moodiness. And she had no idea how that her husband was going to respond. She has been fasting for 3 days without food, without any kind of water. Now, if any of you have ever fasted, and if you've ever read anything about fasting, Jesus made it plain that when you fast, it literally affects the way that your physical body looks. And that's why he told the people who fasted, he said, when you fast, don't be like the Pharisees and Sadducees, that they make their faces gaunt, they don't wash themselves, they don't keep themselves up, they want to appear to men as to fast. But Jesus said that when you fast and when you pray, that you wash your face, that you comb your hair, that you maintain your appearance, so that others do not recognize that you are fasting, and whatever it is that you're fasting about, whatever it is you're praying about, then that winds up being between you and the Lord. And so Esther's physical appearance could have very well changed because of what she had done to her body for the last 3 days by not taking in fluids. Now, for those of you who have ever gotten dehydrated or got close to dehydrated, you know what it does to your skin. You know what it does to your face. You know what it does to your eyes. You know what it does. And so she had to be concerned that her appearance would betray her. She had to be careful that her heart didn't betray her, because if she came before the king sad, or if she came before the king anxious, then if those emotions transferred to the king, then that could have also negatively affected whether or not that he would hold out the golden scepter to her, or whether or not he would have kept it to himself and ordered her immediate execution. And so every one of these concerns that Esther had, they were legitimate. They were real. Because if let me put it to you like this. If Esther was concerned about her life, then she knows firsthand that someone in the past has approached this king with the wrong mindset, or with the wrong attitude, or whoever it was didn't meet his standards as far as his being pleased when they came into his presence, and they lost their lives because of it. And so Esther knew that this was a real deal. And so she also knew that if Ahasuerus or Xerxes had put away Vashti, he put her away too. And so all of these things could have caused her plan to go awry. And so how would his response, how would his attitude, his reception of Esther now not only affect her personally, but also the Jews that are contained in the 127 provinces of the Persian Empire. And so this is what we're going to be looking at tonight as we look at how she gains favor with this impulsive king. Now, the first thing I want us to pay attention to is verse 1, because, boy, I'll tell you what, if she hadn't changed her mind about one thing she was going to do, she was going to change her mind about how she was going to look when she came into the presence of the king. So Esther came prepared. Now, when it came to the appointed day, when it came to that third day, she approached the king just like she had agreed with Mordecai about. And it wasn't the fourth day, it wasn't the second day. So she didn't show up late, she didn't show up early. She showed up on the third day according to plan. And so a lot of us, you know, whenever we tell somebody, and when I did the cowboy church, we did the cowboy church at the Johnson Ranch. And the gentleman who was a dear, dear friend of mine that passed away this past September due to a heart attack. His name was Ricky Johnson. And we just experienced, there's daylight savings time. Then there's Eastern Standard Time. And then we used to make a joke and say, well, there was also Ricky Johnson time. Because if he told you that he was going to be there at noon, he'll show up about 1. If he told you that he would meet you for lunch at Rick's restaurant at 11:30, he'll be there at 12. He just never got into a rush. He was never on time at all. And so there are a lot of people out there that time to them it is merely relative, and they're not really held much by time. And so a lot of times we don't keep our word. But it was important for Vashti and the people who were here involved in this scene, where the lives of so many people hung in the balance, to be precise, to be specific, and keep their word like they said. Now, just for a little illustration, if you've got the notes in front of you, the Empire of Japan determined months in advance that they were going to attack America. And the only way that they felt like that they could defeat America in a war was that the response, and look, their response to America didn't have to do with wanting to draw a larger nation into a war just because they wanted somebody to fight. They were responding to some of the things that America had done that Japan had saw that was detrimental to the Japanese people and to the empire itself. The United States of America did not renew the Treaty of Commerce and Navigation. That was basically a scrap metals deal sales that had expired in January of 1940. The implementation of the United States of America of the Export Control Act. It was an oil embargo that affected the oil flow to the Japanese mainland, to their shipping, to their navigation, to their military. That happened in July of 1940. And so they wanted to attack America when they felt like that America was not prepared. But the attack at Pearl Harbor was not intended to be a surprise. The Japanese desired to make all of the Pacific Island chains part of the Japanese Empire. They sent a message to Washington concerning their intentions and reasons that was to come 1 hour before the attack, but instead it did not get to the people that it needed to get to. It was not translated properly. There was some things and some problems, and so the Japanese attack began at 7:48 on December the 7th of 1941. And so with the Japanese Empire finding out that the United States of America was unprepared and that they saw this as being a surprise attack, tradition tells us that Japanese Admiral Yamamoto, upon learning of the tardy message, it was late, made this famous statement. He said, "I'm afraid that we have awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a great resolve." Well, and this is what we do as human beings. Well, I meant to do such and such. I meant to go here or there. Or I meant to say this or that. But this day that Esther has now invested herself in. And listen, when she stepped into that inner court, she is now fully involved. She is fully invested. There is no backing out whatsoever. And so when she makes her way into that inner court, there's no turning back. No turning back whatsoever. This day that you're reading about, that we're reading about here in Esther chapter 5 in verse 1, is a day that will change the course of history for Israel. And it was vital that Esther stick with the plan, stay the course, and be where she was supposed to be. She was the one, the only one, that could approach the king for her people. The same thing applies, that Christ was the only one who could approach his Father with the only sacrifice that was acceptable for the sins of humanity. And that was the sacrifice of his own blood. It's the same picture that we have right here. And so we see her, and she shows up at the appropriate time. Not only, but she shows up in the appropriate dress. Now, if you recall, going back to chapter 2, when Esther, it came her time as one of the young virgins that was supposed to go before Ahasuerus when he was seeking a new wife. If you go back to chapter 2, the Bible tells us that Esther didn't ask for anything special. The only thing that she required, the only thing that she took with her and used in her preparation before she went before Ahasuerus, when she was in contention for his affections to become the queen, she didn't dress to the nines. I mean, she just took what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, gave her. That's all she took. Nothing spectacular. There was nothing looked her that just went wow, other than her inner beauty. But now this is different, because when you look here, the Bible makes sure that we understand that before Esther went in on that third day, she had on her royal robes. She was dressed to the nines. This is different. The hour was different. The day was different. The gravity of the situation was all different. And so Esther puts aside her sackcloth. She puts aside her ash. And she adorns herself with the royal apparel to gain the favor of the king. Because when you look and you think that when she stands there and she's got on the royal robe, she's got on the crown of the queen. I mean, she had to be a sight to behold. She was impressive. And so this was the person that came before Ahasuerus. Dress reflects what you think about the person that you're standing for. If you don't believe it, go to a courtroom and look and see how a defendant is dressed when they go into a courtroom. They want to make the best impression that they possibly can. So you'll see young men with neckties and dress shirts on. You'll see young ladies that will have on a dress. They will have their hair done. They'll have their makeup done. A lot of the guys will have fresh haircuts. They want to impress the judge. Well, the same thing is what Esther's doing right here. She's wanting to impress Xerxes. Not only this, but the position. Now listen, if she would stand before Xerxes as a queen, then she needed to look like a queen. If she wanted to be treated like a queen, then she needed to look like a queen. I'll bet you that her posture was as straight as a 2x4. I'll guarantee you that her head didn't dip, that her chin was up, that her face glowed, that her smile was bright, that her eyes glimmered, that she came into that inner court with just as good a face on as possible. And she looked like the queen. She had to be not only beautiful, but she had to be impressive. That was not only the person, the picture, but the position, but the picture that she wanted this king to have in his mind that would impress him and that he would always remember. She wanted to look her best, and she wanted him to see that she wanted to see him just as much as she hoped he wanted to see her. They hadn't been together for the last 30 days. She said, I haven't been called the last 30 days. And now here it is, they waited 3 more days. So for more than 30 days, she hadn't seen her husband. He hadn't seen her. And so she hoped that his desire was to see her. And then there was the perception. If she could impress her husband as he gazed at her face into her eyes, then she had hoped that he would be sensitive to the fact that she stood before him in a great need. He knew that she knew the rules. She knew the rules. She knew what the penalty was if she stepped into that inner court. And he wasn't pleased with what he saw. He knew that. He knew that. And so he understood that when she made her way into that inner court, she was going to ask him for something. She wasn't there to make sure that he went by the store before he come home and got some bread and some milk or some ice cream. She didn't stop in there to give him a little list or a honey-do list where he made his way home. He knew that when she stepped inside of that inner court, she was going to ask him for something, and it was going to be big. It was going to be huge. Psalm 36 and verse 8, they shall be abundantly satisfied with the fatness of thy house, and thou shalt make them drink of the river of thy pleasures. When she came before her husband, she wanted him to drink in what he was seeing. She wanted it to move beyond his eyes and move into his heart, and that he remember his great love for her. This is what she did. Now, she gained a favorable response. The second thing tonight in verses 2 through 7. Now, the gaze. I can only imagine the stir that she caused when she stood at the entrance to the throne room of the king. I got tickled. I went to the Cowboy Church one night when we were still down in North Carolina, and there was a young lady. She come pulling in, and she had a truck, and most of the people who came into the Cowboy Church, they drove trucks, and on her truck was a little decal on the back glass, and it said, "Don't flatter yourself, cowboy. I'm staring at your truck." And so when somebody that pulls trailers, does horses, does farm work, sees a really nice truck, they're liable to stare. They're liable to stare. And so I think that Esther probably wanted her husband, when she come walking in, to stare just a little bit. And so she wanted to stir up what was inside the king. And so she wanted to be impressed, whether it was her stateliness or if it was her posture or if it was love rekindled for an absent husband. Whatever happened, whatever it took, I don't think that Esther really cared. She just wanted to cause the king to be captivated with what he saw and to move him. Now, to me, the most beautiful book in the scriptures that speaks toward that is the Song of Solomon. When you look at the Song of Solomon, I mean, it drips with the sticky syrup of fresh love. I mean, it really does. I mean, when you read the book of the Song of Solomon, you see Solomon's love for that Shunammite girl and her love for him. And man, the way he describes her and the way he speaks and his language. I mean, this guy that wrote the Song of Solomon, King Solomon, he was lovesick. This boy was smitten with that Shunammite girl. And that's the way that Ahasuerus was with Esther. He was smitten with what he saw. Song of Solomon, chapter 6, verse 4 says, "You are beautiful, O my love, as Tirzah, lovely as Jerusalem, awesome as an army with banners." I mean, because when you look, here's what Solomon said. He speaks about beauty. You're beautiful. He said, "You're my love. You're not somebody else's love. You're not my girlfriend. You're not my concubine. You're my love." And then when he describes Jerusalem, Jerusalem was the city of peace. Jerusalem was the city of cities in Israel. There was no greater city in all of all of Israel than was Jerusalem. There was not another city that would even compare. And then when he spoke as far as an army with banners, I mean, when you look at the precision of an army, you look at the regimentation, you look at all the things that makes an army impressive. That's what the Song of Solomon said that this king saw, that Solomon saw with the Shunammite girl. It's the same thing here with Esther. When he saw Esther, I'll guarantee you that everything that was going on around him, that was going on around Ahasuerus, man, it just went away. I mean, he was just soaking it in. And as he saw her, I bet you she may have been looking at him for a little bit. He may have been looking at her for a little bit. And he was just sitting there, with his mouth gaped open or something like that. And all of a sudden, oh man, I need to hold out that golden scepter. So he takes and he holds the golden scepter out. That was her gift. She had accomplished what she had set out to do. She had gained the favor of the king. Now, whether she exhaled a breath or a sigh of relief, or whether it put a spring in her step as she made her way, because it said right there that she moved right on over and that she sat down right there at her place, whatever it was, that when she moved, that he watched her the whole way. He didn't take his eyes off of her. And I can imagine she was happy to see him as well. I mean, this was her husband. And so whether it was in response to what he saw or if it was in response to his mercy, really, the Bible does not tell us specifically what it was that impressed Ahasuerus so. But we do know this. He held out the golden scepter. Esther came forward and she touched it. He offered grace and she received that grace. Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20 reminds us that the one that, if you're watching me tonight and you're born again, it reminds us that the one who offered us grace is able to do more than what we ever believe imaginable that he's able to do. Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20 says, "Now unto him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us." See, it's one thing to expect the king's favor. It's one thing to hope for the king's favor. But now Esther has gotten the king's favor. Now she's got to remember what she must do. Because when you look here at verse 2, and then the king comes in with his response to grant. And I want you to look at what the king here says. He said, "What do you wish?" That's what I said. He knew she's there to ask for something. "Queen Esther, what do you wish? What is your request?" It don't matter what it is. It don't matter what it is. I will give it to you up to half of my kingdom. That's huge. I mean, when you think up to half of his kingdom, she could have looked at him and said, well, I'll take 63 and a half of the provinces of your 127. Or I'll take this amount of riches, or I'll take that amount of riches, or I'll do this, or I'll do that. I mean, she had basically carte blanche with what she was going to ask of her husband. I mean, he had basically opened up the checkbook and said, you write the check. Here's checkbook, you write the check. I'll just sign it, is what he was saying. And so it probably never entered the mind of Esther, the extent of her presence and the pleasure that she gave to Ahasuerus, what it meant to him when she came and he saw her once again. He knew that she needed something. If it took giving away half of his kingdom, he was going to find out what it was. Paul also continues in Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 19. He says, and to know the love of Christ, which passeth knowledge. See, God's love is measureless. It's boundless. That's what A.W. Tozer said. He says it's measureless. It is more. It is boundless. It has no bounds because it is not a thing but a facet of the essential nature of God. His love is something he is. Because he's infinite, then that love can enfold the whole created world in itself and have room for 10,000 times 10,000 worlds beside. In other words, there's nothing that we can ask of God that's too big, that's too large, that's too hard, that's too difficult, that he can't do. Now, this king, he limited what he was able to do to half of the kingdom. But when you think that Jesus told us, he said, I'm going to prepare a place for you. Now, as we get ready for Easter to come up in the next couple of Sundays, and as we begin to look, especially on the 28th, at Palm Sunday, I challenge all of you to go into the New Testament and read the final hours in the book of John that Jesus spent with his disciples as he reminded them about how much that they meant to him. I mean, he called them friends. He said, and when he saw that all the things that he had told them that was going to transpire in Jerusalem, he just looked at, fellas, don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, you believe also in me. And my Father's house are many mansions. If it wasn't so, I told you, I'm going to prepare a place for you. Here's what Jesus is saying. I'm going to prepare a kingdom for you. Paul even took it a little bit further. He said that Christ has prepared a place for us. And when we're talking about us, we're talking about not only us, but for Christ and us, to where that we are heirs and joint heirs with Christ in heaven. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul reminded the church at Corinth, he said, why are you taking each other to court? He said, why can't you judge these little matters down here on earth? He said, don't you fellas know that one of these days you're going to sit on thrones and you will one day judge angels? And so if you have the capacity, if you have the capability to be able to one day judge angels, can't you handle these little matters that we have down here on earth? I mean, folks, when we think about the kingdom that awaits us, the kingdom of heaven, it's ours. He is going to prepare a place for us. Why? Because his love is measureless. Because his love is boundless. It is not a thing. His love is the essential nature of what God is and who God is and who we are when he sees us. His love is something that he is. The Bible tells us in 1 John chapter 4 that love is of God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He is love. God is love. That's who he is. His love is something that he is. And because he is infinite, no beginning, no ending, so is his love. So is his love. His love can enfold the entire world, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. See, that's the grant that we have with the Father. Now, here at Sandy Creek, we've got several folks inside the church that are living on the lands of their ancestors, and they received those lands as a part of a land grant from King George. They've had those lands for hundreds of years. But think about the words of John Newton. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. When we're there 10,000 years, it'll still be ours. When we've been there 10 million years, it will still be ours. That's the grant that the love of God gives to us through Christ. When the King of Kings and Lord of Lords offers us everlasting life, the scepter of grace and mercy, all you've got to do is reach out and touch it. Reach out and take it. That's all you've got to do. I tell you what, let's see what time it is. It's 20 till. I've got through 3 pages. Let's see here. I got 3 more. Let's stop right here. That way we're not coming in for just a little part next week or week after next. And we'll start off at a good spot, and I'll do something that I don't normally do. I'll let y'all loose a little bit early and hush, okay? So let's see, this is 17, it's 14 days. That'd be the 31st, is that right? 31st? Yeah, 31st. And so we'll start right here on March 31st. All right. All right, hope y'all are planning on being here Sunday. Hope you're planning on being at Sunday school. Hope you're planning on being at revival. Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night. And pray for Brother Steve. Let me encourage you again. Pray for Brother Steve as he prepares himself to preach for us. And remember, Haley, remember the stewards. I can only imagine those parents when they found out that their child has cancer. And I'm sure that right now their hearts are heavy and they're reeling. And so let's just pray for God's healing. Let's pray for clarity. Let's pray for the doctors and nurses that will be giving Haley care. And let's just remember, remember to lift them up. Let's remember to lift them up and pray. Let's dismiss. Father, I thank you, Lord. I thank you that you are able to do above, beyond, exceedingly abundantly above anything that we can ever ask. Lord, anything that we've ever asked of you, you've never been offended by. Lord, it said that Napoleon Bonaparte was never troubled by the people who came into his presence and asked him for such large things. Instead, he was honored that they felt like that he was able to grant it, that he had the ability, the power, the authority to be able to grant their request. And Lord, that's what we do when we come into your presence. So God, we ask that you grant our request. Lord, I pray that you just be with little Haley. Father, I pray that you touch her body and take that cancer away from her. Lord, please don't let this family's heart be broken. Lord, I pray that you dry their eyes, that you would comfort their hearts, that you would ease and settle their minds. And Lord, let this child be raised up. And let her life be a living testimony of your goodness and your grace and your healing. Lord, I know that Christ can be glorified by that. And so, Lord, through that, God, I pray for her healing. And Lord, I don't know Anoop and I don't know Adrian. I do not know them. I do not know if they're saved. But God, if they are not, then Lord, what a wonderful way to testify of your goodness to them. And Lord, if that's what will gain their salvation, then God, I pray for her healing. And now, Lord, I pray for Sandy Creek Baptist Church as we get ready to prepare ourselves for revival that starts this coming Sunday. Lord, I pray for Brother Steve. God, I pray that you just speak to his heart and prepare him, dear Father, for what he's got to say to us. And Lord, not only what he's going to give, but Lord, also I pray for our hearts that we'll be ready to receive it. And Lord, I pray whether it's through a sermon or whether through a song or whatever it is, that your people will be blessed, that the lost will be challenged and saved, and that the people in this community of Deatonville, Virginia will know that Sandy Creek Baptist Church is a place where we honor you through your Son, Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I ask these things in his wonderful, marvelous, and precious name. Amen. God bless you, folks. Y'all have a great end of the week. We'll see you Sunday.